Editors Nat Sanders and Joi McMillon's lives changed after earning Oscar nominations for Moonlight, written and directed by their Florida State classmate Barry Jenkins. Today, they join us to talk about their careers, Moonlight's Best Picture win following the envelope mix-up, and their latest work on Jenkins' If Beale Street Could Talk, an adaptation of James Baldwin's novel. I'm Carolyn Giardina. Welcome to the Hollywood Reporter's Behind the Screen podcast. Set in 1970s Harlem, If Beale Street Could Talk follows the story of an African-American couple and their families, as told through the eyes of 19-year-old Tish, whose fiancé Fani is arrested for a crime he did not commit. In addition to Moonlight, Sanders' credits include 2013 indie short term 12, for which he earned his first Independent Spirit Award, and 2017's The Glass Castle. McMillon, who with Moonlight also became the first Black woman to be nominated for an Oscar in film editing, recently edited 2017's Lemon. Welcome, Joi and Nat.
Thank you.
Hello.
So, to start, how have your careers changed since your Oscar nomination for Moonlight?
I mean, it has been incredible. I mean, for each of us in different ways. And, you know, it was all so unexpected. It was a $1.5 million movie. And I'll let Joi speak about her. But for me, I had been coming up a very indie film path, and Moonlight was just, you know, it was very special, but as far as budget and scope, it was kind of in line with what I've been doing. And I'd always wanted to be accepted by, you know, the editing community in Hollywood and to be a part of it. But I'd been kind of going on this kind of side indie film path, and Moonlight really opened all those doors. And, you know, Joi and I got invited into ACE and the Academy, and we've really kind of been embraced by the editing community here. And it's been really special. And it's just felt really validating and really good.
Yeah, it's very true. I would say for me, it went from like trying to get a job as an editor to all of a sudden having all of these doors open for me. And in some ways kind of become a spokeswoman for, you know, Black females who are trying to get into editing. And that to me was very surprising, but also like a responsibility that I take very seriously to, you know, become this goal for some people and something that people aspire to. Was felt a little bit of pressure, but also it's very rewarding when you connect with these people who say that, like, I got into editing because of you, and because of you, I now see where I can go, is, you know, very heartwarming, but also I feel like, you know, a little bit of a responsibility to like keep going for them. So, yeah.
And you both actually have been doing quite a bit of speaking for American cinema editors and other such opportunities. Yeah,
I mean, it helps when Joi has her personality. She has a lot of requests, and I'm just kind of along for the ride, but happy to be here.
So at the Academy Awards, after Warren Beatty and Faye Dunaway were handed the wrong Best Picture envelope, you were both on stage as Barry accepted the Oscar for Moonlight. What was that experience like?
Crazy.
Yeah, it still feels like a dream, I'd say.
Did that really happen?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely. Like, did that really happen?
I'm sorry. No. There's a mistake. Moonlight, you guys won Best Picture.
Moonlight won. This is not a joke. This is not a joke. I'm afraid they read the wrong thing.
This is not a joke. Moonlight has won Best Picture. Moonlight, Best Picture.
I think Nat was aware of what was happening way earlier than I was. I was, you know, it was one of those things where you're like, oh, it's okay. Like, it was expected. La La Land won, you know? Like, I had an inkling that we had a little bit of a chance when Barry won the Writers Guild Award, because we all went there and we were at the table. It was Nat and his fiancée, Hillary. It was James Laxton, our cinematographer, and one of the partners at Pastel, Mark Syriac. And I don't think a lot of people know, but you go to so many award shows during this whole process. And, you know, La La Land kept winning. And then when they said Barry's name for Moonlight, I think we all lost our minds. It was like, we're all like football fans. And so it was like our team finally won at the Writers Guild. And I kind of like the door cracked open a little bit at that moment. So I held out hope that maybe possibly we could win Best Picture. So when we didn't, I was like, okay, we gave it a fighting chance. We did the best we could. So I was like on my phone and had all these emails of people saying, you guys should have won and all that stuff. And I was like, okay, I'll get to those later. And then Nat was standing up and I look at him and he's like rubbing his forehead.
I was?
Yeah, you were. And you were like trying to figure something out. And I was like, oh. And I just went back to my phone. And then you were like, Joi, I think we won.
Yeah. Well, the biggest signifier was in the upper corners of the Dolby Theater. There were big screens that show you the live feed of what ABC is showing to viewers back home. And for the first time, like halfway through the La La Land producer speeches, the screens for the first time just went blue. They just kind of like technical problems just shut off. So that was the first signal that just something wasn't right. And you saw little producers running around in the wings, people on headsets. So there were clues that something was wrong. And so then when Jordan Horowitz said, Moonlight, you won, this isn't a joke, it was just too, nobody would do that if it wasn't real. So I knew right away. I said, Joi, we won. And it took her maybe 10 or 15 seconds to realize it too.
It was slow for Dahl to realize what he was saying.
Yeah. And then we kind of had to edge our way past people in the aisle because nobody else knew what was happening yet. And I feel like Ava DuVernay gives a high five or something.
It was amazing.
And we made our way up to stage. And when you're up there, if you're behind the people talking, you can't hear anything at all. So I couldn't hear what Barry or anybody else was saying. So I just kind of kept looking up at the screen, trying to get any clues of what had happened. And I looked over to my right at one point, and Joi had her arm around Warren Beatty and said, "It's all right, Warren. It could have happened to anyone." And this is Joy's first feature as an editor. And the moment was not too big for her. She was ready for it. Consoling Warren Beatty. And then we walked off stage, and, La La Land had just exited stage 30 seconds or a minute before us. So they were all still backstage. So we wanted to go crazy and celebrate, but they were right there. So we had to try to temper it a little bit, but they were great about it. I remember Ryan Gosling was just kind of laughing. He kind of saw the humor in it, and they were great about it.
Yeah.
But then the whole rest of the night, I remember the ride, I guess there's a thing about the Vanity Fair party that, unless you're a celebrity, you kind of need maybe an Oscar. Mm-hmm. You can be in a party of 15 people, but if one person is holding an Oscar, you can get all 15 people in. So
exactly.
So we all consolidated to make sure we had one Oscar in each car, and we piled in and went to the Vanity Fair party. And the whole ride over, I just remember everybody was on their phones because we didn't get to see the zoom in on the card that said Moonlight was the actual winner. Mm-hmm. We didn't know any of that, so we were trying to piece it all together. So even then at the Vanity Fair party, we were still kind of in our corner trying to figure out what had happened, and it was a very surreal night.
Yeah.
Okay. so moving ahead, when did Barry introduce you to his Beale Street project, and what attracted you to the material?
We had known Barry had been planning on Beale Street being his next film while we were still making Moonlight, before the reception of it and before we knew how that was going to go. He had written it at the same time as he had written Moonlight, maybe summer of 2013, I think. He went to Europe and wrote both those scripts, and he didn't have the rights to Beale Street when he wrote it, but he was just hopeful, and he'd already been speaking with the Baldwin family somewhat, and so that was always his next plan, and so that was always kind of what we knew was going to be the next project.
Mm-hmm. What attracted you to the material?
I think for a lot of African Americans growing up in the time period that we are, James Baldwin is a very relevant icon. And so for me, the first time I was introduced to Baldwin was probably in high school. And so it was interesting when Barry's talking about If Beale Street Could Talk, because like he says, that's one of his lesser known works, but he gravitated towards the material. And I always tell people, like, Barry Jenkins is a man who loves love. If you ever meet him, he's so welcoming, and he just is so personable, and the way he captures and projects love is a beautiful thing. And so when I heard that he was, that was like next up for him, it was something that I was excited about, but did feel the pressure of Baldwin because he is iconic and he is, very, very prevalent in the African American community. So if you do him, you have to do him right. So it was exciting, but also a little bit of fear,
Yeah. And the Baldwin family, this is the first, I don't know if it's the first adaptation period. It's definitely the first American adaptation of his work. The family is notorious for not allowing anybody to adapt him and to use his writing. And he's also one of Barry's, maybe Barry's like kind of number one hero. And he's always been in love with Baldwin. So we felt that extra pressure. We knew how important it was to him as well as how important it was to us too.
Editing is often referred to as the final rewrite, and in the case of Beale Street, that included moving that pivotal flashback that reveals why Fonny had been framed for the crime. How was it originally scripted, and what was the reasoning for the change?
Structurally in the film, we did move a lot around. The first act, I would say maybe the first 28 minutes of the film were pretty set. There were some things that moved around that we kept experimenting back and forth, but for the most part, that stayed close to the way it was. But after that, the movie really kaleidoscopes out, and there are a lot of options. Almost anything could go in almost any order. And so it led to months of, we got the scenes cut together in the shape they're in now pretty quickly and figured out all the nuance within the scenes. But we probably spent several months just structurally moving things around, looking at the board, shifting things around, discussing what would work about it, what wouldn't work about it, all the ripple effects. But there were several big things that weren't working in the second act, in the middle of the film, the way it was scripted and constructed at first, which were, there's a big kind of montage, we call it the hustling montage, where things are kind of propelling. Regina King's character ends up going down to Puerto Rico, and things were kind of propelling in this montage, propelling us towards that. All the characters are kind of doing what they can do to try to do their part to get Fonny out. And that came fairly early in the second act. And so it was kind of this big ramp up, and then you kind of have another 20 minutes of dialogue scenes. It just kind of was ramping you up for something that didn't pay off for another 20 minutes. And that wasn't working. And the reveal of what had happened to Fonny, why he's in prison, also was coming too early because, that was connected to, this is all getting in the weeds a little bit, but that was connected to the loft that they get from Levy, the landlord, and that was also coming too early. It kind of took the air out, kind of took the tension out for that to happen. So we knew we wanted to move that back. We knew we wanted to move that hustling montage back, but there were a lot of ripple effects to it. So it took a long time to nuance those moves and figure it out.
Yeah. This film, I feel like with Moonlight, structurally, our structure was kind of locked in early on. With this film, the nuances are so, so, so minute. And so it was like, if you moved something forward, it might have a ripple effect and cause something that came later not to actually pay off in the way that you wanted it to. So there became it was probably like a good 6 weeks where every night Barry was taking the film home with him because we would make a change, and you couldn't just watch the change and do 5 minutes before and 5 minutes after to see if it worked. You really had to watch the whole entire movie from beginning to end to make sure that the change we made was the right change. And so to get to the structure that we finally ended up with, it was a lot of push and pull and maybe trying to trim a scene down or intercutting a scene so we don't lose it altogether. There's a lot of little things that eventually added up to one big thing. But during the process, it was kind of are we doing this right? Is this paying off? Which hopefully it did.
Yeah. Probably the easiest way to describe it is, as an editor, you're the eyes of the audience. You weren't on set. You didn't know what was hilarious that happened in the moment. All you're seeing is things through the monitor, which is how the audience is going to perceive it. So it's really important to kind of preserve those feelings when you're seeing the dailies or when you watch the assembly for the first time. And when we watched the assembly that Joi and I had put together for the first time with Barry, I know we all it was so obvious that the first half an hour, that first act was really working, and there were laughs and it was moving and we were excited. And then in the second act, it just wasn't satisfying, and it just kind of got bogged down. So it took months to kind of dissect exactly why that was happening and to figure out all the right moves to fix it.
In this film, there are a lot of moments that really worked that were surrounded by a lot that didn't. And so ultimately we just had to take a pass where we were elevating everything. So they all were moments that were working, and none of them felt false or didn't, were in there unnecessarily.
The cast was fantastic. Did you have a lot of takes to work with, and would you talk about shaping the performances?
The cast is really good, and I think it's one of those things where every actor brought so much to the table. And so in some ways, when people watch a movie, they're like, I could watch a whole movie just about Tish's parents, or I could watch a whole movie just about the Hunts. But ultimately, all of these different characters are the sum of their parts and basically painting an image of what Tish and Fonny's lives are. And so I think ultimately as an editor, our goal was to make every single performance be a standout performance. And so it validates the presence of that character. And basically you still feel the presence of that character, even though they're still not on the screen. And that's the thing, like the family and the love and the appreciation for each other is felt. And I think that like raises the stakes for Fonny being in jail and trying to get out. And so there was so much that there's a lot of scenes that didn't end up in the movie, but I still feel like the presence of those scenes are still there. Like the actors acted it out. And so with that knowledge of the scene that may have been taken out, it influenced their performance later in the film. And so, yeah, there was great performances, a lot of amazing takes. And I think ultimately what ended up in the final film is a good representation of what everyone brought to the table.
Do you have a favorite scene?
Oh, so hard.
You can think about it while I say mine.
You say yours and I'll think about it.
We each worked on half the film, so it's probably one of the ones just because we know our scenes so intimately. I mean, for ones that Joi cut, I love the lawn scene with Brian Tyree Henry. He's so incredible in it. But my overall favorite scene is probably the perfume counter scene. It's kind of an abstraction. It's not moving the plot forward at all, and which led to, I remember after our first Friends and Family screening that we did, there was some talk about losing it. And I think it got in Barry's head a little bit. So he's like, maybe we should lose this. It's not moving the plot forward. And that was one where I dug my heels in really, really hard. That the scene was really special and really had to stay in the film. And luckily, one of Joy's mentors, Terry Shropshire, the editor, was at that screening. And she also echoed that that was the first words out of her mouth were how amazing that scene was. So I could kind of use that as collateral, or just as kind of evidence with Barry. Be like, Terry loved that scene, Barry, you can. So, but anyway, I love that scene. That was my favorite.
It's a good one.
Even though you wanted me to cut it.
This is the thing. I do appreciate the scene, and it is a beautiful scene. It was one of those moments where the film currently was, it stuck out. It was one of those things that did not move the story along. But later, as we whittled it down, it found its place, its home in the film. And it definitely was like, oh yeah, this is necessary. And the reactions that the scene got from a lot of people when we previewed it, it scored really high. And it was like, okay, even though this moment may not seem important on its own as a whole with the film, it was definitely, a valid scene that needed to be kept in. I still can't think of my favorite scene.
When we talked before, one of you specifically mentioned the scene with Regina King.
That was my hardest scene.
What was your hardest scene?
That was definitely my hardest scene between Regina King, who plays Tish's mom, Sharon Rivers, and Emily Rios, who plays Victoria. That was I think that scene is a very delicate scene. And for me to get the right balance between these two characters who are coming together, who are both broken by the situation and are trying to find some semblance of reconciliation, and it just doesn't happen. And so it's a powerful scene, but it's also a fine line with that scene. I remember Barry sitting behind me and us trying to navigate it in a way where the audience feels, both of these women's pain, So I think that was definitely my toughest scene. I guess my favorite scene, I think it's from it's like a section. It's from them coming home to Fonny's apartment for the first time. So the lovemaking all the way through the train, like that whole section, I think is my favorite.
You used a lot of flashbacks throughout the film. What was the challenge to cutting between those periods?
I think our biggest challenge, when people first watched the film, it was connecting with Tish, who was basically our vehicle through this whole entire story. And It's interesting because it was the same thing with Moonlight. Like, we had to actually do a pass where we made sure that people were entering and exiting through this film and were connecting with Chiron. And so we did a pass on this film as well, where people were coming in and out of the flashbacks, for the majority of them, through Tish, and making them know that this is her story. She's the one who's navigating this, and like, she's basically our connection. And I think once we did a pass of that, it kind of grounded the story and was like, we're in her head, she's narrating this, but we're also connecting with her as we're coming in and out of these flashbacks.
What's your process like working with Barry? For instance, does he spend a lot of time in the editing room?
He does spend a lot of time in the editing room.
Yeah, I'm Barry. We do our first pass by ourselves, but pretty much after that, from the first time we show him the assembly, he's pretty much in with us every day and just bouncing back and forth between our two rooms. And it's such a morale boost when Barry's around, because he's just so he's so exuberant, and when you do something that he loves, like, you just get the best reaction you could ever hope to get. He can be really big and animated, and he'll do airplanes around the room, and you're always kind of striving to get that reaction out of him.
Yes. One of the things I love about Barry is he definitely creates an environment where he includes everyone. Like, our assistant editor, Daniel Morphesis, and our post-production assistant, Israel Vasquez, both of them, he definitely incorporated in our whole process of like coming in and watching cuts with us, asking their input. And it definitely made us feel like, like a post-production family, the way we interact and work. And that's one of the things that I appreciate about him, because, in the long run, you spend so much time with these people. So if you don't like coming to work, it's not a good thing. But I think we create an environment in our post team where it's overall collaboration, from the top down.
Yeah.
So.
And Barry was stretching himself to be with us every day, because he owed so many scripts for Underground Railroad, the Amazon show he's going to be doing next year. And so he was having to, anytime he got a spare moment where he could go outside and write, he would do it. But he made it a priority to be with us every day, despite how much he had on his shoulders.
So what's next for each of you?
I'm working on a film right now. We're still in production, almost done, called Just Mercy. It's at Warner Brothers. Stars Michael B. Jordan, Jamie Foxx, Brie Larson, and I think it's going to be really special. It's with the director I've worked with several times. We made a movie called Short Term 12 together, and it's based on the memoirs of Brian Stevenson, who's an amazing person. He is a lawyer in Alabama who has worked to get people off death row who are wrongfully convicted. I think he's gotten 120 people off, majority, or if not the vast majority, all African-American males, wrongfully set up and wrongfully convicted. He just opened the Legacy Museum it's very heavy, but about the lynching, history of lynching in the South. And he's an amazing, incredible person. And I think the movie's going to be really special.
And I am pairing up with Janixa Bravo, who was the director of Lemon, and she's going to do a film called Zola with A24, which starts at the end of the month.
So what is it like working as a team compared with when you're working solo?
Joi and I working together on Barry's films kind of happened organically, and Barry and I really wanted to bring Joi in on Moonlight, and it worked out so great. We had such a great time, and it was such a great experience that we wanted to do it again. And Moonlight was a little different as far as how we split it up. On this one, it was really just 50-50. Mm-hmm. We kind of decided ahead of time that just kind of arbitrarily, I would take the first and the third. We just kind of split it into quadrants, and I would take the first and the third sections. Joi would take the second and the fourth. So rather than just doing a scene at a time, so we could kind of work on a flow and work on our transitions and kind of have a section that could be yours. And it definitely made assembling the movie much nicer to only have to assemble half the movie.
So much easier.
And then from there, Barry would come and work with me on the first and third sections. He would go working with Joi on the second and fourth. Anytime we would watch the movie together, we would obviously give each other lots of feedback on each other's sections and keep working to, give notes and make it the best thing that way. But we didn't really swap scenes at all. It was pretty much my scenes were my scenes, Joi's scenes were her scenes. And it seemed like it worked out well to me.
I think so. I think one of the things that enables us to collaborate so well together is, I think Nat, Barry, and I are all perfectionists. And so we we definitely challenge each other to be our best selves. And so a lot of times, if there's something that I'm trying to get away with in my edit, Nat will be like, well, that's not working. I'm like, oh, don't point it out. But
you have one. You definitely had some of those in mind, for sure.
But also there's no egos, and we trust each other to the utmost. And so that enables us to work together in a way where we all know that we're trying to achieve the best film possible. And I think working with people who challenge you creates an energy where you're constantly trying to be your best self, and I think that's probably like the best way or best place to operate from is, trying to be and perform at your best.
What is most misunderstood about editing?
How much time you have?
Yeah. That's a really good question. I mean, I think one of the reasons why editing is potentially a little under-discussed or appreciated is it's really hard a lot of times to talk about what we do, because a lot of times we're fixing all the problems. And so sometimes you can't say the scene shouldn't be watchable or it shouldn't be good, but we dug in and we found one line reading from this take. We found another one from this other take. We just had to kind of really construct and get this scene together with dental floss. So it was it's a major achievement that the scene plays as well as it does, because if you watch the dailies, you would have been despondent about the scene. You can't say that, or you can't say this actor really was green and didn't have it, and we had to really, really dig it out. All those things you can't talk about. And just to be clear, I'm not talking about Beale Street in this case. I just mean on all the projects I worked on and just editing in general. That's one of the reasons.
I think one of the things that a lot of people aren't aware of when it comes to what editors do are the million little choices that we constantly make with the director about, when score comes in, when score goes out, the best shot on this person, if it's in focus, lighting, all these little things that we're constantly looking at the frame and making sure it's the best frame possible. I really think some people really just think, they shoot a movie and it's done, the little things of us looking at visual effects, sound design, all of these little things that we are, behind the scenes orchestrating. I don't think people are aware of, just the little decisions that we're making. I think they kind of just think that it kind of magically happens. And I think a lot of people are okay with that. Everything that we do is so nuanced and so the choices of maybe taking a take from, a different, a line reading from a different take and putting it in a different shot because that shot has better focus, people don't think about that. They think it was shot that way and it's perfect, and it's one of those things where we're constantly making these little choices that hopefully enhance the viewing experience. And I just think a lot of people just aren't aware of those things. So, yeah.
We are, sorry, can you tell that we like answering this question? We are the director's collaborator in telling the story the best way it can possibly be told. I think a lot of people think that editing might just be about the specific craft of this cut or this cut. People sometimes will, if they're trying to say something nice about, if I've just had a movie come out, they'll say, I loved your cuts. And it's oh, I mean, that's nice, but that's not that's such a small part of what we do. We take a lot of pride and we share the responsibility with the director that we are presenting the movie in the, that when at the end of these 10 months or however long it took, that we're showing the movie in the best possible form that based on what the footage was that it could possibly be shown in. And so we do tons of screenings. We analyze audience, how it's playing, where the energy is, what's not working. And then we go and fix that. And then we show it again. And we are the director's collaborator. It's not all the director and it's not all us, but together we are working to make the movie the best thing it can possibly be. And okay, it's something to say, but
well, If Beale Street Could Talk is an incredibly moving film, and congratulations to both of you, and thank you for coming in and joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, happy to.